They often rode to church in winter. Catherine took a hand of each of the children and brought them into the house and set them before the fire, which quickly put color into their white faces. I urged my companion to hasten now and show his amiable humor, and he willingly obeyed. But ill luck would have it that, as he opened the door leading from the kitchen on one side, Hindley opened it on the other. They met, and the master, irritated at seeing him clean and cheerful, or perhaps eager to keep his promise to Mrs. Linton, shoved him back with a sudden thrust and angrily bade Joseph, "Keep the fellow out of the room. Send him into the garret till dinner is over. He'll be cramming his fingers into the tarts and stealing the fruit if left alone with them a minute." "Nay, sir," I could not avoid answering. "He'll touch nothing, not he, and I suppose he must have his share of the dainties as well as we." "He shall have his share of my hand, if I catch him downstairs till dark," cried Hindley. "Begone, you vagabond! What, you are attempting the coxcomb, are you? Wait till I get hold of those elegant locks. See if I won't pull them a bit longer." "They are long enough already," observed Master Linton, peeping from the doorway. "I wonder they won't make his head ache. It's like a colt's mane over his eyes." He ventured this remark without any intention to insult, but Heathcliff's violent nature was not prepared to endure the appearance of impertinence from one whom he seemed to hate even then as a rival. He seized a tureen of hot apple sauce, the first thing that come under his gripe, and dashed it full against the speaker's face and neck, who instantly commenced a lament that brought Isabella and Catherine hurrying to the place. Mr. Earnshaw snatched up the culprit directly and conveyed him to his chamber, where, doubtless, he administered a rough remedy to cool the fit of passion, for he appeared red and breathless. I got the dishcloth and rather spitefully scrubbed Edgar's nose and mouth, affirming it served him right for meddling. His sister began weeping to go home, and Cathy stood by confounded, blushing for all. "You should not have spoken to him," she expostulated with Master Linton. "He was in a bad temper, and now you've spoilt your visit, and he'll be flogged. I hate him to be flogged. I can't eat my dinner. Why did you speak to him, Edgar?" "I didn't," sobbed the youth, escaping from my hands and finishing the remainder of the purification with his cambric pocket-handkerchief. "I promised Mamma that I wouldn't say one word to him, and I didn't." "Well, don't cry," replied Catherine contemptuously. "You're not killed. Don't make more mischief. My brother is coming. Be quiet. Hush. Isabella, has anybody hurt you?" There, children, to your seats," cried Hindley, bursting in. "That brute of a lad has warmed me nicely. Next time, Master Edgar, take the law into your own fists. It will give you an appetite." The little party recovered its equanimity at sight of the fragrant feast. They were hungry after their ride, and easily consoled, since no real harm had befallen them. Mr. Earnshaw carved bountiful platefuls, and the mistress made them merry with lively talk. I waited behind her chair, and was pained to behold Catherine, with dry eyes and an indifferent air, commence cutting up the wing of a goose before her. An unfeeling child, I thought to myself. How lightly she dismisses her old playmate's troubles. I could not have imagined her to be so selfish. She lifted a mouthful to her lips. Then she set it down again. Her cheeks flushed, and the tears gushed over them. She slipped her fork to the floor and hastily dived under the cloth to conceal her emotion. I did not call her unfeeling long, for I perceived she was in purgatory throughout the day, and wearying to find an opportunity of getting by herself, or paying a visit to Heathcliff, who had been locked up by the master, as I discovered, on endeavoring to introduce to him a private mess of victuals. In the evening we had a dance. Cathy begged that he might be liberated then. As Isabella Linton had no partner, her entreaties were vain, and I was appointed to supply the deficiency. We got rid of all gloom in the excitement of the exercise, and our pleasure was increased by the arrival of the Gimmerton band, mustering 15 strong, a trumpet, a trombone, clarinets, bassoons, French horns, and a bass viol, besides singers. They go the rounds of all the respectable houses and receive contributions every Christmas, and we esteemed it a first-rate treat to hear them. After the usual carols had been sung, we set them to songs and glees. Mrs. Earnshaw loved the music, and so they gave us plenty. Catherine loved it too, but she said it sounded sweetest at the top of the steps, and she went up in the dark. I followed. They shut the house door below, never noting our absence. It was so full of people. She made no stay at the stairs' head, but mounted farther, to the garret where Heathcliff was confined, and called him. He stubbornly declined answering for a while. She persevered, and finally persuaded him to hold communion with her through the boards. I let the poor things converse unmolested, till I supposed the songs were going to cease, and the singers to get some refreshment. Then I clambered up the ladder to warn her. Instead of finding her outside, I heard her voice within. The little monkey had crept by the skylight of one garret, along the roof, into the skylight of the other, and it was with the utmost difficulty I could coax her out again. When she did come, Heathcliff came with her, and she insisted that I should take him into the kitchen, as my fellow servant had gone to a neighbor's to be removed from the sound of our devil's psalmody, as it pleased him to call it. I told them I intended by no means to encourage their tricks, but as the prisoner had never broken his fast since yesterday's dinner, I would wink at his cheating Mr. Hindley that once. He went down. I set him a stool by the fire, and offered him a quantity of good things, but he was sick and could eat little, and my attempts to entertain him were thrown away. He leant his 2 elbows on his knees, and his chin on his hands, and remained wrapped in dumb meditation. On my inquiring the subject of his thoughts, he answered gravely, "I'm trying to settle how I shall pay Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait, if I can only do it at last. I hope he will not die before I do." "For shame, Heathcliff," said I. It is for God to punish wicked people. We should learn to forgive." "No, God won't have the satisfaction that I shall," he returned. "I only wish I knew the best way. Let me alone, and I'll plan it out. While I'm thinking of that, I don't feel pain." "But, Mr. Lockwood, I forget these tales cannot divert you. I'm annoyed how I should dream of chattering on at such a rate. And your gruel cold, and you nodding for bed. I could have told Heathcliff's history, all that you need here, in half a dozen words." Thus interrupting herself, the housekeeper rose and proceeded to lay aside her sewing, but I felt incapable of moving from the hearth, and I was very far from nodding. "Sit still, Mrs. Dean," I cried. "Do sit still another half hour. You've done just right to tell the story leisurely. That is the method I like, and you must finish it to the same style. I am interested in every character you have mentioned, more or less." "The clock is on the stroke of 11, sir." "No matter. I'm not accustomed to go to bed in the long hours. 1 or 2 is early enough for a person who lies till 10. You shouldn't lie till 10. There's the very prime of the morning gone long before that time. A person who has not done one half his day's work by 10 o'clock runs a chance of leaving the other half undone. Nevertheless, Mrs. Dean, resume your chair, because tomorrow I intend lengthening the night till afternoon. I prognosticate for myself an obstinate cold at least." "I hope not, sir." "Well, you must allow me to leap over some 3 years during that space, Mrs. Earnshaw." No, I'll not allow for such a sort. Are you acquainted with the mood of mind in which, if you were seated alone, and the cat licking its kitten on the rug before you, you would watch the operation so intently that puss's neglect of one ear would put you seriously out of temper? A terribly lazy mood, I should say. On the contrary, a tiresomely active one. It is mine at present, and therefore continue minutely. I perceive that people in these regions acquire over people in towns the value that the spider in a dungeon does over a spider in a cottage to their various occupants. And yet the deepened attraction is not entirely owing to the situation of the looker-on. They do live more in earnest, more in themselves and less in surface, change, and frivolous external things. I could fancy a love for life here, almost possible. And I was a fixed unbeliever in any love of a year's standing. One state resembles setting a hungry man down to a single dish on which he may concentrate his entire appetite and do it justice. The other, introducing him to a table laid out by French cooks, he can perhaps extract as much enjoyment from the whole, but each part is a mere atom in his regard and remembrance. Oh, here we are the same as anywhere else, when you get to know us, observed Mrs. Dean, somewhat puzzled at my speech. Excuse me, I responded. You, my good friend, are a striking evidence against that assertion, excerpting a few provincialisms of slight consequence. You have no marks of the manners which I am habituated to consider as peculiar to your class. I am sure you have thought a great deal more than the generality of servants think. You have been compelled to cultivate your reflective faculties for want of occasions, for frittering your life away in silly trifles. Mrs. Dean laughed. I certainly esteemed myself a steady, reasonable kind of body, she said, not exactly from living among the hills and seeing one set of faces and one series of actions from year's end to year's end, but I have undergone sharp discipline, which has taught me wisdom, and then I have read more than you would fancy, Mr. Lockwood. You could not open a book in this library that I have not looked into and got something out of also, unless it be that range of Greek and Latin, and that of French, and those I know one from another. It is as much as you can expect of a poor man's daughter. However, if I am to follow my story in true gossip's fashion, I had better go on, and instead of leaping 3 years, I will be content to pass to the next summer, the summer of 1778. That is nearly 23 years ago. Chapter 8. On the morning of a fine June day, my first bonny little nursling, and the last of the ancient Earnshaw stock, was born. We were busy with the hay in a faraway field when the girl that usually brought out our breakfasts came running an hour too soon across the meadow and up the lane, calling me as she ran. "Oh, such a grand bairn," she panted out, "the finest lad that ever breathed. But the doctor says Mrs. must go. He says she's been in a consumption these many months. I heard him tell Mr. Hindley, and now she has nothing to keep her, and she'll be dead before winter. You must come home directly. You're to nurse it, Nellie, to feed it with sugar and milk, and take care of it day and night. I wish I were you, because it will be all yours when there is no Mrs. But is she very ill?" I asked, flinging down my rake and tying my bonnet. "I guess she is. She looks bravely," replied the girl, "and she talks as if she thought of living to see it grow a man. She's out of her head for joy. It's such a beauty. If I were her, I'm certain I should not die. I should get better at the bare sight of it, in spite of Kenneth. I was fairly mad at him. Dame Archer brought the cherub down to master in the house, and his face just began to light up. When the old croaker steps forward and says he, 'Earnshaw, it's a blessing your wife has been spared to leave you this son.' When she came, I felt convinced we shouldn't keep her long, and now I must tell you the winter will probably finish her. Don't take on and fret about it too much. It can't be helped, and besides, you should have known better than to choose such a rush of a lass." "And what did the master answer?" I inquired. "I think he swore, but I didn't mind him. I was straining to see the barn, and she began again to describe it rapturously.